The Fletcher Seventh-day Adventist Church is a Christian people who believe Jesus is the Son of God, the hope of the world, who died on the cross to redeem us all for eternal life with God. Our purpose is to lift Jesus up and love people in. Visit our website at www.fletchersda.org. And now be blessed by the Holy Spirit as you listen to a Bible message.
Our scripture reading this morning is found in Matthew, the 9th chapter, verses 14 through 17. Matthew 9, 14 through 17. I'll be reading from the NIV translation. Then John's disciples came to him and asked, "How is it that we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" Jesus answered, "How can the guest of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, then they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do men pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, and the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved."
Would you bow your heads with me? God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. God, you the rock that we stand on, and the Redeemer who rescues us when we've fallen off that rock. May your words be in this place today, God. We love you because you first loved us. We ask all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen. So in 2015, a bear from Colorado made national news when he broke into a pie shop. I don't know if any of you remember that story. It was a nice break in all the bad news that we always get on the news cycle. This bear finds himself in the vicinity of a pie shop and decides to go in. I don't know how he broke in, but he gets inside. And the next day when the pie shop owner gets there, they can tell what's happened. There's broken glass and there's food everywhere. They can see that the bear has been in there. I think they even found the bear in there maybe the next day. I don't remember. I hope so, because that would have been hilarious. Open up the back door, close the back door quickly as you walk back out. But the owner got inside and looked around. They got the bear out, I guess, and everything. And so they're cleaning up, and they found out that the bear had a certain thing that it liked. The bear ate, I think it was 24 cherry pies, they said, 14 apple pies, and exactly 0 of the strawberry rhubarb pies that were there, which I agree with that bear. I was leave those alone. My wife loves those, so you can still send those over. She'll eat them, though, so she'll be fine with that. But when we look in the stories of the Bible, as the people of Jesus' day interact with Jesus, they seem a little bit like that bear to me, where they're really not sure what to do with Jesus. They like some of it, they don't like other parts of it, and it's just this confusing conundrum for everybody to figure out what Jesus even is. And we see that in our text today as the disciples of John come to Jesus and they ask him a very simple question. They say, "Why don't you what?" What? You guys hear it? Yeah. "Why don't you fast like we do? Why don't you fast like the Pharisees do?" And for us to hear those words, it's a little bit strange. I don't know if you've ever fasted. I've fasted before. It can be a benefit. It can also just ruin your day. I mean, it just depends on how it goes for you, right? But it's not a big part of our culture anymore. I know Christians that fast. I know a lot of Christians that don't. Some have tried it, some haven't. And it's not really a big deal whether you do or don't. It's not a major part of our religion in the West, is it? For better or worse. But for the people of Jesus' day, this was not only a part of their religion, it was part of what the Jewish religion revolved around. Twice a week, the Pharisees and other people that were especially convicted about wanting the Messiah to come back would fast. And so that's just what they did. It was a big deal. In the story Jesus tells about the man praying at the temple, he says, in his litany of all the things that he was kind of patting himself on the back for, one of them was that he says, I fast twice a week. So he's acknowledging God, saying, God, I thank you that you've made me. I thank you I'm not a sinner, and I show that I'm not a sinner by going to the temple, by paying my tithes, by fasting twice a week. And so this was just a common occurrence. People saw people fasting. People fasted all the time. And John's disciples, for all the shifting that they did following John to follow this new prophet, they were still really just following a lot of the same things, but with the idea that the Messiah was closer than before. And so they fasted. And they come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, why don't you fast like we do? It's almost humorous when you back up like a couple verses. Like in the same context, the Pharisees have just come to Jesus and they say, what? Why do you eat with sinners? So basically, Jesus can't get it right. Some people are like, why aren't you fasting? Some people are like, why are you eating here? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Right? Everyone's just after Jesus. Why do you eat with these people? Why do you not fast? Why don't you wash your hands? Why don't you make your disciples wash their hands? It's just like this constant barrage of people who like Jesus, but they want Jesus in their own image. They like what Jesus has to offer. They like some sort of like feeling they got from Jesus, or the idea that Jesus has the power to do something. But at the end of the day, they don't want Jesus as himself. They want Jesus, but Jesus that fasts on Tuesday and Thursdays, right? They like Jesus, but he needs to fast. So if he doesn't fast, I don't know. They like Jesus, but they don't want Jesus to like eat with the prostitutes, because that's awkward. They like Jesus, but they want him to wash his hands. They like Jesus, but they want him to make his disciples wash their hands. They like Jesus, but they don't like him like grabbing grain out of the field on the Sabbath, because that's not really, legal for them. They like Jesus, but they want Jesus in their own image. Why do you fast? Why don't you fast, rather? Why do you eat with these people? I remember my nephew. His name's Link. He's the cutest little guy. He's just super verbal, so he'll like talk and he can express himself really well. And he'll express these really deep ideas too. It's fascinating just to watch him grow up. And he processes his emotions openly and just kind of talks through what he's feeling. Like, I'm really scared of this. I don't know about that. And so we were at this little water park this last summer with my family. And we went down the water slides, and he kind of got his courage up and did the water slides. And then as we kind of were going through all of the different things, we came down to this like last big hurdle for him. And it was like there was this halo from like adulthood for him, like from big boyhood shining down on this thing he needed to conquer. It's the high dive. Do you remember the terror of the high dive when you were younger? You might have blocked it out because you had PTSD. I remember standing up on that thing, and I'm like, how in the world did this thing grow, like, from being down there to climbing on it? Just lift it up. It felt like, I'm like standing up in the stars, looking down, like, nah, I'm not jumping off this thing. But he went through that experience. He's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so he was really excited. I want to jump off that. And we're like, you don't have to, Link. No pressure. No big deal. He's like, no, I really want to. It looks like fun. And I had gone up there and done this big squirrel dive off it earlier, so I think he thought it was just, like, not scary and easy, and like, all right, I can do this. And so we got him to the little ladder there, and he's like this tall. He's a tiny little guy. And so he's like climbing up into space up this ladder. And like the whole water park noticed it, at least the people in the vicinity, and everyone stopped to watch because he's so cute. And he like looks so earnest, his earnest look on his face, and like climbing up. And he gets up there, and he's like ready to go. And he's like looking at us, kind of smiling, good, kind of takes a step out a little farther, and then he stops. He's like, and you see this look on his face that, again, I remember from my childhood, and you're like, oh no, ain't nobody's fault but mine. I climbed up here. And like everyone's like rooting for this guy. Come on, you can do it, you can do it. And again, people that don't even know him have gathered. I'm like, come on, buddy, you can do it, you can do it. And he's like, ah. And he stood up there for like 10 minutes, right? And just like at that point, we're like, he's not going to do it. And so we're like, you can get down, buddy. It's okay. He's like, no, I want to do it. Like, all right, jump. You can do it. No. And then he started like trying to half turn around while he's already out on there, where he's still over the pavement. We're like, oh gosh, this is how like Reader's Digest stories start. Like, just come down. So he comes down. We're like, it's okay, buddy. No, you can do it. Another time, no problem. He's like, I was just too scared. That's too high. It's higher than it looks, isn't it? And like, yeah, it is. He's just like, not even ashamed. We're like, cool. He waited around, wanted to go again, and he like got his hopes up again. Like, no, wait, that does seem fun. Like, maybe I was just being foolish. It wasn't that scary. Climbs back up. I'm going to do it this time. And you kind of like got his like game face on. And again, everyone's watching. They're like, this guy's so cute. Like, ready to go. Climbs up, gets up to the top, and looks around. And this time, he's up there for like a second. And he was like, nope, still stupid, down. Just like, that was the end of his high dive career. Next summer, he's going off the high dive, I think. It's probably going to happen. But like, his expectation about what this thing was going to be did not match what reality was, right? And we get, again, this sense that for the people that are following Jesus, they climb up onto the high dive with Jesus. Like, that seems fun. He's got all these great teachings. He's got all these great ideas. But then the reality hits, and they're like, wait, but Jesus is not what I expected. And we can be super hard on the Pharisees and on the people of Jesus' day. But I mean, if you think about it, if you put yourself in their place, Judaism, they believed, was given directly from the mouth of God to Moses, right? This is stuff that's written in tablets with God's fingers. These are the words of God himself written down and passed down from generation to generation. There's a temple that they've been following these like temple practices. I mean, this is like 1,400 years. What's 1,400 years from before here now, right? Imagine your family or your culture. I mean, America didn't exist yet. The countries in Europe didn't exist yet. They weren't those countries yet. Italy was a bunch of little city-states. So Italy, I mean, it was inhabited. It was not the same world, right? You go back that far. Imagine there's something that had been intact for that long, not only intact, but down to the details of what you eat and what you don't eat, who you allow into the temple, what you do in the temple, what makes God happy, what frustrates God, the stories over those 1,400 years of the interactions of this God with your ancestors. And you learn and you grow and you study this. And it foretells a Messiah that's going to come and like take this whole thing and like make it awesome, right? He's going to free your people from the slavery they found themselves in. He's going to ride in like this conqueror. I mean, you read it all through the Old Testament. It's all there. And the Jewish religion was a religion of joy in many ways. We oftentimes miss that reading the New Testament because we hear about the church fighting against a lot of the Jewish people, and we get the sense that it's this really sour, serious thing. In a lot of ways, it was very joyful. The festivals were celebrations, and people treated them that way. But at the end of the day, like most any religion, it was a very serious affair. It's not just some party. You're interacting with the God of the universe. You're trying to get right. You're trying to figure out how you make yourself right, or how this God makes you right, however it works, right? This transaction that lets you move from being in this world into the next world. And you're dealing with this God that can strike people dead if they mess up. Like in the Old Testament, this God can open the ground up and swallow people whole. I mean, this is not messing around. A prophet was mocked by kids. He calls a bunch of bears out, and the bears maul these kids, and some people try to clean that up. They're like, well, the bears didn't kill the kids. I'm like, you're okay with that? Like, the prophet only mauled my children with bears. They didn't die. I'm fine with that. Why do you have to be such a helicopter parent? Like, who cares? Like, millennials. Like, this is serious business. This is a God that's not messing around. This is a God with power. This is a God who draws lines between holy and unholy, between clean and unclean. Like, even certain diseases keep you from going into his presence in the temple. You have got to get that taken care of, and then you come back to the temple, right? This is a God who draws hard lines. This is a God who is loving and kind, but also is very serious, and again can split the earth open and drop lightning bolts. And then this Messiah, who claims to be a Messiah, shows up, and he's like the Greek god Bacchus, the god of parties and joy and like silliness, and he's hanging out with prostitutes. He's not like doing bad things. No one ever accuses him of doing something immoral, but that's who he's hanging out with. He's definitely hanging out with the wrong crowd. He's not hanging out with the crowd that the Old Testament would have let into the temple, and he claims to be God himself. Does that make any sense? He's playing like loose and free with the rules about the Sabbath. He's the God that said you'll stone someone if they pick up sticks on the Sabbath in Deuteronomy or Leviticus. That God is like, yeah, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Like, my dudes were hungry, so we grabbed some grain. And they're like, wait, what? That's not allowed. And so all of the expectations that these people had for a powerful Messiah, we focus on that often. Well, they were expecting a military ruler, and they got Jesus who was not. He's more of a kind of a sage. Like it went a lot deeper than that. It went down to the basis of what even is religion. Who is God? How does God want you to relate with him? What is sin? What is evil? How does God want you to relate with sin and evil? What is inside and outside in the kingdom of God? How does God want you to interact with that? Suddenly, this line with the Jews and the Gentiles, it was like very seriously enforced with parts of your body that you don't want cut on. Like, not a joke, right? Now he's suddenly like, hey, don't worry about it. The Gentiles are great. Like, I've not found as much faith in Israel as in this Gentile over here. Oh, he's a Roman soldier, so he's part of the system that's stomping on you. Yeah, he's the best one so far. And they're like, you got to be kidding me. And so it makes sense why so many people climbed up, like Link, my little nephew, up on that high dive, look around, they're like, whoa, this is not what I signed up for. I'm willing to sacrifice. Peter's willing to risk his life with a sword to die for the Messiah, right? He's ready for the insurrection. He's got his bayonet ready to climb up on the barricades and fight. But that's not what Jesus came for. These people are ready to fast and to make themselves suffer and be super serious for God and show that they've got it together, and they're willing to work. And then there's Jesus partying, and they're like, what? They like Jesus, but they like Jesus in their image. Is it possible that we ever do that? I'm not going to give you a list of here's one way you could or another way you could. You know your own heart. We're all different, right? But are there ways that we like Jesus? We want part of it. We like the apple pie, but we're going to leave the strawberry rhubarb because like that one's a little tart for me. It's not my jam. I like Jesus talking about like forgiving all my sins. I don't like Jesus talking about me forgiving everyone else's sins, especially when they're super nasty sins that I don't like. I'm particularly disturbed by those ones. They're in the news a lot, so I hate them, right? We don't like Jesus that cuts across what we've inherited. And that's part of the problem here is that as Jesus goes on and starts engaging with them, it's interesting because he doesn't just engage straight with them and say, okay, let's talk about fasting. Which again, if you've never fasted, don't just go home and try it, because if you're not talking to a doctor and you like don't eat any food for a week, like you could hurt yourself. But if you are in good health and your doctor says try it, it can be a blessing. I mean, it's a cool thing. It clears your brain. It's some cool stuff, right? It's not bad to not eat for a little while. We've all eaten enough very much. Enjoy potluck. With guilt sprinkled on it now. Like, I hate Sabbath now. Right? But Jesus doesn't even engage with that. He's not like, well, no, fasting is good, and here's the parts of it that are good, and here's how it's been misused. Jesus jumps in and just completely sideswipes that. It's interesting because if Jesus wanted to engage with that, and they're like, why don't you fast on these 2 days a week? Jesus would be like, well, because I fasted for 40 days straight, ding dong. Like, oh, right, okay, yeah, have you done that? No. I'm better, win, checkmate, right? Like, if Jesus wanted to engage them on this, why aren't you doing these holy expectations, right? Jesus is like, I did them better than you. He doesn't even engage with that. He tells this weird little, not a story, but an illustration. He says, nobody takes an old pair of pants and puts a new piece of cloth that hasn't been shrunk on it and then washes it after that, because then it shrinks and rips the cloth. Who's dumb enough to do that? You don't put the new on the old like that. He says, who's dumb enough to take an old wineskin that's already been used to the point where it's stretched out and then puts new wine in it to ferment it? Because as it ferments, it expands, right? The gases build, it expands. You put all that new wine that's going to expand in an old thing that's been expanded as far as it can. It served its purpose. He says, what happens? You ruin it. Both. He says you ruin the new wine and you ruin the wineskin. It's all destroyed. Jesus doesn't even engage them on why he's not following their religious practices to the point where they think he should follow them. He says, your religious practices are like a pair of pants that was fine at one point and it fit, now it's ripped, and you want to try and patch it up with me. If you do that, I'm going to destroy it. Your religion, your beliefs, your culture, what you've inherited from your fathers, he said, it's like an old wineskin that's been stretched as far as it can go. And you want to put me in that? I'm going to ruin it. We can believe that Jesus transcends our expectations. We can get to the point where we're like, okay, Jesus is different than other religious leaders throughout the ages. He teaches different things. And, he's probably even different than our church, right? Like, Adventism doesn't get it right. the Baptist church, my Baptist friends and Lutheran friends and Anglican friends and Catholic friends, even my atheist friends, they would all say, no, I mean, I get things wrong. I know I don't understand everything, right? Like, I don't have it all right. Like, we could be to the point where we're like, yeah, I don't get it right. This church isn't perfect. We could grow. So let's put Jesus into it, the way we've always done things, because the only problem is Jesus isn't in it, and then it's going to work, right? We've got this old wineskin. It's empty, so let's just put Jesus in it, and then everything's going to work okay, right? And Jesus has this very dire warning. He says, not only will it destroy what you put it into, it'll destroy the good news of who Jesus even is in the first place. It's all ruined. Again, we can look at the Jews of Jesus' day and see how hard it was for them to let go of what they had inherited when it got in the way of what Jesus wanted to do new for them. But don't we do the same things? What do we have in our congregation? What do we have in our families, in our own personal thoughts and beliefs that we're just trying to fit Jesus into, right? I mean, we see it, people do it on the bigger scheme with political ideologies. If you go and Google image Jesus today, you'll find some funny stuff. I did this, I taught in high school. Whenever I talked about the Trinity or who Jesus was, I would go through this slideshow of all these crazy pictures of Jesus I found, literally making Jesus in our own image, right? I mean, Jesus is certainly a communist because he loved poor people. I'm not convinced heaven's going to be communist. Well, Jesus is certainly a capitalist because he likes freedom. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's no capitalism in heaven because Jesus just gives everything away, right? So which one? Is he communist or capitalist? I'm pretty sure Jesus isn't really that worried about it. Us fitting into whatever old wineskin we have on earth, right? This is the way that we've always done it in our church, so Jesus fits into this thing. Jesus says, behold, I do something new. Jesus comes into a religion that he himself founded and says, you know what, that served its purpose. But if you try to fit me into that, you're going to have nothing but trouble. It's not going to work. And we watch the early church struggle with this, right? So these are people that walked with Jesus. These are people that literally listened to Jesus' voice. They had his teaching ringing in their ears, and they found the early church, right? This isn't a generation removed. These are the people that knew Jesus. And they struggle and struggle and struggle with the idea that Gentiles can even be Christians. That's a big struggle for them. Is it true? Has Jesus really released the good news of the kingdom to the Gentiles? And it takes Peter having his crazy vision about all these animals coming down, where Peter's I finally saw it. God showed me that he's not against the Gentiles, and we shouldn't be either. And they're oh, wow, amazing. It's so amazing. Who could have guessed? Now we look at it, we're obviously, right? They fought and fought and fought. And so then they're okay, fine. Maybe Jesus has accepted the Gentiles so we can preach to them, but the Gentiles have to become Jews first and then Christians, right? And they argued over that. You read in Acts, they have this huge church council where they all sit down and argue and for who knows how long, days probably. And they hash out these details of what do Gentiles have to do to follow Jesus. Do they need to be circumcised? A lot of early Christians thought, well, obviously they have to be circumcised because that's what we believed for 1,400 years. God taught that. So you do that, right? You do that and follow Jesus. And we see Paul fighting that in his ministry, right? You read through the writings of Paul over and over and over. He fights that impulse for a generation after Jesus. And he gets so angry about it finally. He writes in one of his letters, super sarcastically. He said, yeah, you keep talking about circumcision. I wish you'd go the whole way and cut the whole thing off, he says. Right? Literally, that's what he says. People would have been oh, dang, right? Imagine the General Conference president releasing a statement at the next General Conference, Adventist Church. He reads it, what? That's Paul. So, that battle is there. The church cannot seem to grasp the idea that Jesus came from this beautiful religion, this beautiful teaching that God had given. And he didn't, reject all of it. He still did certain parts of it. but he just kind of walked away from it and started something new. He said, follow me. He doesn't say, follow those teachings. He says, follow me. And the church struggled and struggled and struggled. And they finally come down to where they release a statement. They're like, okay, fine. Here's what it seems good to us and the Holy Spirit, which I love. They're like, the Holy Spirit and us had a talk, and we all agreed. They really still think they're pretty awesome. It seemed good to us and the Holy Spirit, by the way, that you should do these things. And they jettison circumcision. They jettison some of the other dietary rules. And they basically say, don't eat animals that have been strangled. That was a big Old Testament one, which ironically we're like, wait, what? That's a thing? Like, they thought that was bigger than other things in the Old Testament. They said, avoid sexual immorality. And I forget, there was a third one. I can't even remember it now. But it was like, just like these three basic things. They said, do these things and then follow Jesus and we'll call it good, right? A lot of your church members in your congregation are still going to get circumcised. Don't worry about it. We're telling you as the leaders, you don't got to worry about that, right? They battle and battle and battle and battle just to follow the basic, simple words of Jesus. They can't seem to understand. And it ironically didn't really shift until really the Jews finally left Christianity and you had all Greek and Roman converts. And then sadly it shifted so far, they left parts of Judaism that Jesus had kept, like the Sabbath. But that didn't happen until later. So you've got this like battle, this struggle. What do we do with Jesus? Like, Jesus is here. What do we do with him? And so they have to be standing there like listening to Jesus, these followers of John, wondering what in the world are we supposed to do? Because here's this person, our leader, John, has said is the Messiah, and yet he doesn't match any of the things we were expecting. He's not what we were looking for. All the people that like what he's talking about are people we don't really like, the prostitutes and tax collectors, the lepers. So Jesus has this like train of losers and B team and varsity players in his wake. And they're like, what do we do? This makes no sense. And Jesus says one more thing that I think is like the core of the whole problem here. What do we do with Jesus? Who is Jesus? We make him in our own image. We try to fit him into what already pre-exists in our belief systems rather than accepting something completely new from him. And he says this. He said, if the bridegroom is present, why would his friends mourn? If the bridegroom is present, he said, how can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? Because the reality for the Jews was that fasting for them was completely tied up in their hopes and dreams for Messiah. They fasted for Messiah. They hoped for Messiah. They would sacrifice their own pleasures in this world through fasting to declare their hope in the new world the Messiah was bringing, this joy that they hope for. And Jesus says, you claim to be fasting and hoping for the Messiah. He's here. What are you doing fasting still? If God is with you, why are you crying? If God is with you, why are you mourning? Why are you living like you're hoping for something that's not here yet when it's here? And Jesus looks around and says, the friends of the bridegroom, they know I'm here and they're celebrating. He says, there'll be time for sorrowing, and we've all been there, right? If you had times for sorrowing in your life and times for mourning, they're real. I think Jesus is talking here more about his sacrifice on the cross, that his followers would suffer for those 3 days and mourn. But I think it's also true to kind of extrapolate that out to our time. There is time for mourning. We're not always happy and joyful, and that's okay. But there's this deep reality that Jesus pushes back on us. He says, my name is Emmanuel, God with us, and I'm with you. If I'm with you, what reason is there to mourn? If the God of the universe, who created out of nothing, is with me, why would I mourn when I lose things that he can replace? If the God who opened the Red Sea is with me, why am I going to freak out like it's all on my shoulders? If the God who created like dogs to like run and chase their tails and all kinds of manner of foolishness that's in this world, if we take a second to stop and look at it, like the God that did like silly, crazy things, if that's the God that's with us, why would we fast? Why would we mourn? And the disciples look at Jesus, and they don't quite get it yet. Paul points out years and years later that Peter's still suffering, struggling with his racism towards the Gentiles. He's not sure what to do with that. Like, they don't get it yet. But one thing they do get is that the Messiah is with them, and they're super, super excited about that. And John's disciples aren't quite sure what to do with that yet. The Pharisees aren't quite sure what to do with that yet. And many of us aren't quite sure what to do with that yet, are we? If God is with us, why would we mourn? If we're people that believe that Jesus is not only coming back soon, but is with us, because the Bible says that he would send a comforter, who is God himself, the Trinity, with us, closer than he could even be on earth. That like God is literally like entwined into our souls and with us and carries us. Shouldn't that bring us joy? With all the struggles that we face in life, to know that there is meaning behind that we can weep and we can suffer and we can be sad, but underneath that, there are hands that carry us. Shouldn't that give us joy? Even when we lose and suffer. If we believe that God is coming back, in the meantime, he's promised to take care of us. He says, don't worry about what you need, I'll take care of that. He says, if I take care of the birds, they're not super important in the scheme of human society, and I take care of them. Even when we don't have enough, shouldn't we still feel those hands holding us up, that we do have enough, that God carries us, that he gives us meaning, he gives us hope. And when we go through life and find ourselves in places that we don't expect, whether that's through aging and you wake up one morning and you're a lot older than you ever expected to feel, and you did way less on your list than you ever expected to have done before that age showed up, or a career you invest in doesn't really pay out the way that you expected, or relationships you've just like invested yourself in deeply don't pan out. Like when we find ourselves in places where we don't get what we expect, that life does not give us what we hoped for, that our dreams don't play out exactly how we expected, we find ourselves on a high dive we can't bring ourselves to jump off of. When we find ourselves in the unexpected, to realize that God is not tied down to work in the past that you're bringing him. God works outside of that and does something completely new. He doesn't need the old wineskin of your dreams. He doesn't need the old wineskin of your hopes and your education and your career and your success and your failure and your relationships. God doesn't need the wineskin of what you have to offer. He creates something completely new if you'll let him. Emmanuel, God is with us. And it brings joy. Again, the Jewish religion was very joyful, but even their religion, so full of joy, was not ready for a joyful God. A God that laughed, that children were completely drawn to. A God that told silly stories, that gave silly answers to questions people asked. A God that sat down and partied. Like literally his first miracle was making something to drink. And you can argue whether it was alcohol or not. I think that misses the deeper point. The deeper point is Jesus brought the party. The party was going to die and Jesus restarted the party. That's God. That's the first miracle he did. He flipped the playlist back on again and brought out the stuff to drink and said, all right, everybody dance. Like Jesus showed that joy and life are at the core of who he is. Because shouldn't it be? At our best moments, aren't they full of joy and hope and freedom and the lack of self-awareness where you're so tied up in looking like you're something you're supposed to and you just enjoy life. And it's those moments you're like, wow, I'm fully alive. This is great. That's the presence of God. I love the statement by the early church father Irenaeus. He says, the glory of God is man fully alive. That God did not come to bring us less life and attenuate us and tie us down. He came to set us free and give us more life and joy. That the religion of Jesus is not in danger of too much joy, it's in danger of too much somberness. That the religion of Jesus is not in danger of being tainted by the wrong crowd, it's in danger of being stopped by the well-meaning right crowd, those of us who aren't sure what to do with him. That the religion of Jesus is something completely new that brings life into death, joy into suffering. He says he trades us beauty for ashes. When I taught at a private Christian school, we had a student right at the end of her senior year, and like right at the end of the senior year, you always know, any teachers here know, you're like, just like right, gripping the edge of your desk, like, please don't do something stupid. And you know those couple kids that are just, they're bound to ruin their life, and they're going to do something dumb and not be able to march in graduation or get kicked out at the last minute, and you're just like, why? You could have waited 3 days and done that same dumb thing, and it wouldn't have like kept you from marching. Just, if you're going to be dumb, wait 3 days, but that's not how dumb works, apparently. And so you always, just like with fear and trepidation, like at the end of the school year, waiting for some senior to do something totally stupid. And on one of the breaks, apparently this one of the students I taught, she had a boyfriend back home, got pregnant, came back to school, started showing, it came out, and the school, they weren't sure what to do. They're like, it's so close, she's never been a troublemaker. I mean, and they were kind of torn up about it. To their credit, they were very torn up about it. No one was just wanting to throw her out. But they felt like there was a standard for the school to uphold. They didn't want to mess with the image of the school. I don't know. I wasn't on those committees. And they asked her to leave. And they said, we'll let you take your finals. We'll have someone proctor them for you at home. We'll give you your certificate. And, but you can't finish out the last week here. You definitely can't march. You're not welcome at the ceremony either. They don't come to it, please. And that was it. And then I ran into some of her friends in class one day, and they said, hey, Pastor Jeff, this girl, she lives about, hour from here, outside of Seattle, over on the peninsula over there. These guys know where that is. Rainy old peninsula, so pretty, mysterious place, mountains and trees and fog. It's super pretty. She lives over there. And the church she's at, they agreed to let us do a little graduation for her. Do you think you could come and give a talk for it? And I didn't even ask the school. I wanted to give them plausible deniability. I didn't want to be a total jerk. I also knew I was going to go no matter what, so I didn't really care, and I didn't want to cause drama. So I was like, yeah, I'll be there, absolutely. And it was cool. Even they had talked to the lady who was the registrar, and she had agreed to go as well. So the school just kind of turned a blind eye to it, because again, they had felt bad. They didn't know what to do. They're like, we got these policies, and we don't want to enforce them. So they were kind of relieved some of us were going, and they're just kind of like, good, fair enough, whatever, and just kind of left us alone. But the registrar and me and a bunch of her students, friends, we went over about a week after graduation. We drove over to the peninsula there outside of Seattle into the foggy little area, and went to her church. So we get there, and I gave my little talk, and she had some of her friends up on stage. It was sweet. They came and wore their caps and gowns with her, sat on stage with her. We're like, no, we're not letting you get away, not letting, throw you out like this. We're graduating with you. We're your class. We're going to stand up here with you. And it was really sweet. And so we go through this whole thing, and they have a little refreshment reception afterwards. And so I went to that, and I'm hanging out. And this older member makes eye contact with me, and I can see her, and she's looking at me, and I think maybe she knows who I am. I had done some recruiting that year, so I'd been out quite a bit in churches, so I thought maybe she met me there. I don't know. But I could tell she was just looking at me and wanting to talk, so I walked over towards her and introduced myself. And she's like, oh, okay, so you work at Auburn. I'm like, yeah. It's like, I hate that school. I'm like, okay. And she just lays into it I hate this and I hate that and this and they did this. And I'm like, cool, fair enough. I don't know. I'm sorry that you hate it. I hate it some days, but I work there. It's not I don't own it. I can't change anything. I'm not sure what you want me to say. And so I just kind of listen, like kind of there, whatever. And I leave to another part of the room, away from her as far as I can get. And she finds me again, like 20 minutes later. She's face to face with me again, and she like launches right in. She's like, and where's your tie? You looked so unprofessional, like just like ripping into me. And I'm like, I wasn't even offended. I just really couldn't care less at that point. I was just so shocked. Like, where is this coming from? Like just this vitriol, like acid, like anger, just rage. And she just kind of laying into me and how the school's a problem and I seem like an idiot, so it's probably good I work there. And I'm like, she's never letting her granddaughter come to that school. I'm like, what is even happening? Why are you even here, right? And I found myself starting to feel really angry. Not because I was offended, but angry that like that's what the church is so often, right? That like she's an Adventist, she's a member, and she's at this place, and she's angry, and she's rude, and she's aggressive. And I'm like, what's the point, Jesus? Like, this is what you died for? Like, this is what you made? Like, you started this whole thing, and like, this is what we got? Like, this certainly is not helping anyone. This is not Ty Gibson on an airplane being witty and like winsome. This is someone on the airplane, you're like, please don't tell them you're Adventist, because they shouldn't know, because it's not going to be good for the Adventist team to know that you're on it. Just this anger and rage. And I found myself really kind of feeling almost angry at the church in general and at God. Like, why? What's the point? Like, this girl gets kicked out of school for these like technicalities. Everyone knew she was a sweet girl. No one like thought ill of her. It was a mistake many people have made. And at this church and these angry members, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly, like, it hit me as I'm looking around. I'm like, I was just at this little country church that threw a party for a little pregnant girl and threw their doors open and said, we want you here. We know why you were kicked out. We're not ashamed. We love you. You're great. We're going to celebrate with you. And all her friends gather in. And this church, all these old ladies bake muffins and cookies and cakes and fill that room full of stuff with joy and love. And they surround this girl and they love her and they celebrate her. And they're like, we're so glad you're a member here. And she said, I'm so glad I'm a member here. This is my church. I love this church, she said. Like, there was that joy and love and compassion. Like, that's the kind of church we all want to be a part of. Like, that's Jesus, right? That's what I want, right? But then there's this sad other person who has missed the memo and is angry and bitter and cold. And suddenly I didn't feel angry at her. I just felt sad for her. I'm like, you're missing it. You're like right here in the middle of so much love and joy. Like, why don't you come on in? The water's nice. Like Jesus looking at John's disciples, come on in, guys, the water's nice. Why are you fasting when the bridegroom is here? It's a party, guys, come on in. The God of life, Emmanuel, is here. God is with us. And he leaves us with that choice. Like so many stories in the Bible, he leaves them open-ended because I believe he wants us to put ourselves into those. As if it's us, we are John's disciples, and we've gathered in front of Jesus. And we said, Jesus, why don't you keep the Sabbath like we think you should? Jesus, why don't you preach about this topic as much as my pastor back home does? Because I think you should. Jesus, why don't you give out these tracts? Or Jesus, why don't you go to those concerts? Why don't you do these things? Jesus, why don't you look more like me? Jesus, why are you full of so much joy? It's making me uncomfortable because I'm Adventist and smiling a little too much to be a good Adventist. You're definitely like a bad Adventist at best. And Jesus looks at us and he says, man, the water is nice. Come on in. At the center of all reality in life is a God who invented laughter and joy and affection and dogs chasing their tails. May we be a church like that church that threw a party for a little girl who got kicked out of school because she wasn't holy enough to graduate. And they said, well, she's holy enough to be here. We'll celebrate her. May we not miss the joy, the dangerous joy that will break your wineskins and rip your clothes and leave you feeling a little bit exposed. And he'll clothe you with something new with his own righteousness. And he'll give you a new wineskin full of the joy of the kingdom of God. May that dangerous joy shatter you today and leave you laughing in a way that Jesus would. And just confuse everybody. How are those Christians laughing? That makes no sense. Because the bridegroom is here, how could we not celebrate? God, we thank you that you are with us. We thank you that amongst all of the pain and suffering that we do experience on this world, God, you are with us, you are present, and you fill us with joy and laughter. God, you trade beauty for our ashes. Even when we suffer, God, we do so in your arms. Even when we struggle, we do so knowing that you carry us to an ultimate ending, to a meaning in our meaninglessness. God, may Fletcher be known as a church that laughs and celebrates because Jesus is with us. May this church see you in each one of our lives, God, because we can't stop celebrating the fact that you are you, and you are very much different than we could ever have expected, so much better than we hoped for, and you're ever present with us, Jesus. We love you because you first loved us, and we ask this in your name. Amen.
We trust your relationship with God has been strengthened from what you have heard today. Please visit our website at www.fletchersda.org. May God give you his peace and joy.